Greetings, folks. This is Scott, and you're tuning into A Woman's Place, the podcast where we break down all the policies and politics that affect the 51%. That's right, women are half the U.S. population, and Ashley and I are here to give you the facts about how today's events are affecting them. Find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Hello, Ashley Brown.
Hello, Scott Osborne. I love it when I was listening to some of our previous episodes. If we forget to say last names, it throws us off.
Yeah, no, that's a bad sign.
Right?
That's a bad. We've got to have complete identification.
We could be other people. We don't know. How's it going?
Excellent. And I'm excited about this show, and I'm excited about some of the shows we have coming up. So all is good in our information world.
I know.
You good?
So I'd like to talk about just a preview of what we're talking about today. And then we have a really interesting author that's going to be joining us. So maybe give us a little teaser, Scott.
The teaser for today, the teaser for our upcoming show, we have Stephanie Kuntz joining us to do two shows. And if you have not heard of Stephanie Kuntz, then you need to Google her right away. Mm-hmm. She is probably America's foremost authority on all things marriage. She started writing books on this probably 40 years ago and is a social scientist, a researcher, a professor, and just does a phenomenal job at setting the record straight. What is the history of marriage? She's one of the most profound institutions. I don't like that word, but institutions that govern so much. Even if we are not personally married, it structures so much. It has structured so much throughout history. And she not only gives you that history, but also talks about what it looks like today and what that means. And she's got a new book out. We're going to be talking about that. So really excited about this conversation, whether you are, no, I wasn't going to say pro or con. You don't have to take sides, just to understand what it means, what it's looked like.
Well, and it's such a beautiful tie-in to today when we're kind of talking about,
yes,
right, the past 50 years of the women's movement, the women's progress, where we are, some of the shifts there. So it's a beautiful tie-in that we.
It is a good time,
right?
So look for those to drop. We're going to be taping her in July, and they will drop shortly thereafter. We'll keep people updated, but do a little investigation of Stephanie Kuntz because we're excited about that. Absolutely. Should we give a little bit of how we came to today's topic, though? I think about things that prompted us to do today's topic.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It seems like there's a movement of, as one author, I believe it was Helen Lewis, said, we feel like we're in a moment when a lot of political and social and maybe religious and certain media strands have decided that all things women are bad and all things men are good. She's got a pithy little phrase about that, but it's kind of like, if something's going on that's wrong, maybe women are to blame, and feminism and their influence and their jobs they've got. And let's celebrate then men's role and masculine traits and male supremacy. That's very much the feeling of a lot of things going on in our world. So we thought it would really be great to look factually, because facts are cool. You'll get our commentary too, but facts are cool about the past. Commentary, absolutely, about what women's life looked like 50 years ago approximately and today, and see what changes have come about, and are they right? Are they wrong? What is feminism and the role of women done?
No, I think that's we talk about it a lot, and then Ann Carter, who produces for us, talks about it a lot. We're going to get her on the show one day.
Yes, we should.
We'll have her voice. And one of the things just from the news that I think is interesting, and it kind of takes the religious aspect of it, is the Southern Baptist Convention. They meet once a year to, talk about the things within their church. And I guess they have a constitution for the church and they vote on different things. They voted earlier this month, we're in June, that women would not hold leadership positions of being a pastor, which that's not a change. Currently, women can't be a pastor within the Southern Baptist Church, but they can hold leadership positions or elder positions.
Currently.
And that's been voted on 3-1. that they want to limit women's roles in leadership positions in the church. It does get voted on again next year. So I don't know if we have any Southern Baptist women out there that are feeling they'd like some leadership. It might be worth a topic at the dinner table.
That's so interesting. And there was a time, I'd have to look up, but there was a time when, right, pushing women into most of the organized religions, elevating their roles, Judaism, Christianity, etc., it was a big thing, and there was really a thinking that this was going to be the wave of the future. And now you're right, to see some major denominations, many of them have struggled with it. And they've certainly struggled with homosexuality in religious leaders, but the notion that now they're going to limit women's roles. But you said they voted on it again, so it's not final. Is that how it works?
It's not final. Apparently they have to have 2 consecutive convictions.
Okay.
According to the couple of articles I read. So I am not an expert in this, but it's
maybe we'll do a deep dive on religion and women one day.
I think that would be a really fun thing to look at. Just because I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and there was a huge division within the Episcopal Church, making women or homosexuals into bishops and
the ordaining of gay Episcopal priests, right?
Yeah, a whole split in the church. So anyway.
I don't usually do this, Ashley, but my dog is here. Can you hear my dog being very disturbing, or are we good? Okay, thank you.
I cannot.
Okay, so should we get started on our topic?
We should.
So we mentioned that there feels like there's this thread of kind of pushing back for women, and we'll talk about the backlash at the end of the show, but we thought it'd really be worth saying what have been the changes. And I often say in 50 years, the changes have just been a sea change in the role of women. And we're going to talk mostly about the US, though a lot of it applies globally, or certainly to the West, but we're going to focus mostly on the US. I said, let's look at women in 1970. So it's a little more than 50 years, but that was really a period of change. And just to get started with where we were, I don't know, Ashley, if you've looked at this yet, but do you know the percentage of women under 30 who are married and the median age of marriage, for example, for women in 1970? Because that's a big, what were their lives like?
Well, I do, only because you put your research in our run of show notes. So I would be cheating if I said I didn't. It's a really interesting comparison to today. So we were looking at, I'm like, do I have it up? I didn't memorize it. So you've got to tell us now, Scott.
1970, median age of marriage for women. That's half the women older, half the women younger, 20.8. So not even 21. So 20-year-olds, half of them getting married younger. Okay, so that's the median age. And this is the one that really blew me away.
Yes.
Of women under 30, 90% are married. So basically, 90%. You get married. And this squares kind of anecdotally with, again, maybe people talk to their mothers, their grandmothers, depending on how their ages divide, but that was the norm. You got married. That was the social expectation, and that was absolutely the norm. That has been a sea change. I think what's interesting is that drove so many things. If you're a 20-year-old and you're married, you're probably not educated very much. Your job skills have to be very low. You don't have that kind of experience. You don't have life experience. You don't have independence. You just do not have any independence. And we'll talk about how that drives a lot of behavioral issues. But that's one statistic. So how about women with college degrees? 11% of women only have college degrees. So we're not a quarter, nothing. That's a tiny fragment, have college degrees. Now,
I was going to say, because of you already made the point that so many women were married. And again, the median age was 21, just under 21. So there's a lot of 18-year-olds getting married.
Yep.
And I know my
18, 19, absolutely.
My sister-in-laws, their dad was like, there's no need for you to go to college. You're going to get married. So why, even the mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of it was, again, it was social, right? There was the so-called famous, if you went to college, you were going for your MRS degree. Maybe you'd get, a man who was a college graduate. I have friends whose somebody said to me, my mother had 3 and 4 kids by the time she was 25. She was married at 19. It was very common. Women had, on average, 3 children. So you've got relative house full of kids in your early 20s.
Mhm.
That really drove a certain kind of life. But also, they couldn't have independence in the economic world. You could not get a mortgage on your own. You could not get a credit card on your own. You could not, in many places, have a bank account on your own. That you certainly couldn't have a business on your own. If you did work, and many women did work in some capacity, you could be fired if you were pregnant. Absolutely no problem with that. Help wanted ads were literally men, women. I mean, the segregation of those was complete. So you had to have men signing everything that you did in your economic and financial world. So the practical dependency, not just the social, but the practical dependency was complete, really.
Well, the financial dependence.
Financial dependency. Thank you.
Financial dependence is, especially for women who, there's some many wonderful marriages and wonderful partnerships. But if you happen to be in one that is an unhealthy relationship, or there's domestic violence, which can be psychological, financial, physical, all of those things, there were no options.
No.
Limited options. And
Also,
again,
too,
we
at
were
that
alive,
time,
Scott.
you really couldn't get a divorce easily. The first no-fault divorces began in 1969 in one state in California, which, fun piece of trivia, Ronald Reagan signed as governor. So before that, you had to show cause. You had to literally prove adultery. Women could not easily get divorces, even if they had other options. So, and again, it's not a statement of like, did they have a quote-unquote good marriage? Did they love their spouses? All of those things may have been true, but it certainly created a hierarchy of roles in a home, an expectation of hierarchy of roles in a community. Women did not have positions of leadership in senior companies. Only 5% were in any senior leadership in corporations. Representation in Congress and state legislatures was minuscule. There have been no female governors. So it created expectations and a reality of real division of roles, who were in leadership positions, who were in homemaking positions. And that was driven by a lot of these facts. Again, it's not a statement about, do couples love each other or not? I mean, they may well. My grandparents, phenomenal marriage, adored each other. But there was absolutely a very, what is called traditional division of responsibilities for many, many years. So that was huge. I think one of the things that I think is interesting is also about what I call the sociological implications of this, how it shapes behavior. And I think about if women, we could talk about both men and women, but if women are dependent from a young age, they need to be taken care of in all senses of the word practically by a husband in this model. They're married, probably have children. It has created behaviors that induce women to want to be pleasing, what we sometimes call performative happiness. It leads to appearance. It leads to a desire to perhaps not be challenging, to put other people's needs first. Again, appropriately, putting other people's needs first can be nice, all of those things, but it creates not only a mindset, but a social structure where those are the only options. Speaking up if something is challenging is almost not an option. You do not have that form of equality. There's an expectation that men are in positions of power and leadership, whether or not they want it, whether or not they're good at it. Those are the social expectations. Women received allowances from husbands. That was very much the norm. They would get an allowance. So this created behavior patterns which women would police in one another, look nice, put on some lipstick, don't say things that might be a little bit controversial or would challenge people. We see those things absolutely today in many circles. So I think it's interesting to sort of see where they come from, because that helps us understand why these expectations and behaviors are still there.
Well, and people pleasing.
People pleasing.
I think is such traditionally a female just opportunity that we have to move beyond. That it's just when we talk about gender roles and gender boxes, I think that's still something it's shifting, and maybe that's where the discomfort, like there's so many reasons for the backlash of the discomfort of women stepping into their own. And part of it is, wait, you're supposed to be the salve to my day and make me feel better and not bring any stress or etc. Because that traditionally was women's roles at home. Like, let's not bring any more stress to the breadwinner when he comes home, right?
Right. And then women, again, in a sense, didn't have a choice. They may have been great at it. They might not have been, but in a sense, they don't have any choice because of the built-in dependencies.
Right.
There's an anecdote. Did you read the Sorora Chamali book, Rage Becomes Her? You know the book? I should put that in the show notes. That's an amazing book. She has a lot of amazing things, and maybe I'll just recount the anecdote really quickly that she, for all, her mother and father, for all accounts, she never heard any disturbances, debate, dispute, fighting among them. And one day, I forgive me, Soror, if I get this a little bit wrong, but I'll get the point out there. She went into the kitchen and something had happened. She had no idea what, and her mother, her calm, cool, collected, attractive mother, was picking up the marital dishes, aka the sets of china, and one by one heaving them. I don't know if it was out the window or over the balcony, just in this, not saying a word, picking up every single piece of china and just, and as she recounts, not a word was ever said, and her mother just picked up afterwards. So, that was, and think about what that says about your choices, your internalized rage in her case. I have no idea what led to this. It's not really revealed, but I know many, many women who, if they have not experienced it themselves, they know women, certainly older women, with seeds of that. It's like, okay, yeah, we got it. You stifle that stuff. You stuff it. You turn it inward. You don't say it, whatever it might be.
All the time.
So, yeah, it was a very telling anecdote.
And something that we haven't touched on that we will, birth control.
Yes.
Talk about, if you were married, you had to have your husband's consent to get birth control.
I mean, first, obviously, there was just the scientific options. The pill really came in the 60s. It was a very high dose at the time. The biology and the chemistry has changed a lot as science has improved. So, but it came in the 60s. You had to have a husband's permission. Single women could not get it until 1972. There was a Supreme Court case that said it was Baird v. somebody in 1972 that single women could. So before that, yeah, I mean, you could not control your family and your reproductive life. So huge. I mean, always huge. Again, we'd had some medical advances, so women were not, in most demographics, dying in childbirth the way they had been, which was wonderful. Health had improved. But birth control, I mean, all of us know, again, whether it's our mothers or grandmothers, that, oops, somebody was an accident, or, they thought they were done. And then lo and behold, there's twins, 5 years later,
Right.
Because widespread birth control was not as available, it was not socially accepted. Women couldn't get it on their own, all that stuff. So that was definitely a huge change. Some other things that were big in 1970, certainly women were not having, we talked about educational attainment. We could talk a little bit about now, it is time to talk about what some of those changes have been. So if we now just look at what happened in those years. So the birth control pill came in the 60s. We had the Baird decision in 72, so women could get birth control pills on their own. Roe v. Wade, of course, was 1973. Before that, you had abortions, but they were illegal, dangerous, expensive, all those things. It was really a very threatening time for a woman. And again, I know women who lived through had abortions in the pre-Roe era. And there are stories out there. I always encourage people to ask women and, get those stories while they're still sort of first person narratives. So women now could have some control over their reproductive life. Title IX in 1972, huge change. I mean, what do you think of when you think of Title IX? I know what most people think of, but when you hear Title IX, what do you think of?
Well, I think most people think of sports.
Yeah.
sports and access to sports and that piece. But there are so many facets of Title IX, including educational opportunities. And, one of our past guests, Elizabeth Spahn, she was one of the first integrated female classes in Yale Law School. So, there's some ramifications.
And Title IX, interestingly, people think of sports because it was very visible, and that's kind of what the media is, but it said segregation of sexes. They had to have equality of the sexes in any educational institution that took federal funding. So this was the open door now to eliminating sex discrimination in things like admissions and college courses, etc. So this really was the beginning of the open door to an education revolution, which we'll see has just turned things around for women. Again, Title IX did it in the US, other factors in other countries, because the higher education of women is a global phenomena. So it's not just due to Title IX, but in this country, it really just brought the sea change. I think the sports, for those people who like sports like I do, the access to sports was a not insignificant, even though obviously getting into classrooms and getting degrees and BAs and doctorates was huge. But sports was a very visible statement of empowerment, of control over body, of being out in the popular world as a team outlet with other women. So once team sports became more common for girls in high schools and then colleges, it did lead to other things for all the same reasons that men's schools traditionally loved sports. It was leadership building and character building and all these kind of things. And now women had access to those sort of soft benefits too, which was big, really was big, is big, I should say. So we said, yeah.
Go ahead. Well, I think the other thing that's important was and it was a little later in the 80s, was the victim protection, that was a huge
protection of victims of domestic violence, right? And that was the mid 80s. I think 84, 88, there was maybe a renewal. Exactly. Prior to that, women had no recourse if there was violence within a marriage, basically. I mean, now we call it intimate partnership, but that was just assumed that was essentially, the control of the husband. Law enforcement would not get involved. So that was a huge issue, yes. And that did come a little bit later, but no fault divorces, we mentioned that. So that really started to roll across America in the 70s. So you saw marriages breaking up. I mean, it really was the beginning of some of the divorce trends. I think it's interesting. We should probably mention also that we talked about how women's roles had this dependency and not speaking up. In a way, we also forced men into roles that weren't healthy. They didn't, one might want to sort of look at people in positions of power and say, and blame them. But some men who probably might not have wanted that role were forced into that. They're the breadwinner.
Absolutely.
They very often had little contact with their families. It was assumed that they were the decision makers. Maybe they weren't such great decision makers for the family, but men were also put in this position where it was assumed you're the leader, you're the authority figure, you make the decisions, you make the money, and they inherited this role, if you will, that was just given to them. So again, it was these boxes. We talk a lot about boxes. You definitely saw it on both sides. I think that's worth pointing out. Also, though, in the 70s, you started to have economic freedom. Women, the first time, I think it was 74, could have credit cards in their own name, bank accounts, sign on a mortgage without a husband. It wasn't until 1988 that women could own businesses on their own. I mean, think about that. This is not that long ago.
1988. And I don't want to age myself, but I was out of high school. So, I mean, this is, it's easy to think, especially if you're a Gen X or certainly Gen Alpha, that this has always been the case, or these opportunities have always been there. And really, in our lifetime, they have not.
And I think it's important because whatever generation you're in, as we think about, in the grand scheme of, modern humanity, And the last 50 years, it's just a little tiny bit. And
Right,
again, when we
right.
talk with Stephanie Kuntz, we'll talk about marriage, but let's just think about women's roles.
Mhm.
And that's a huge sea change in what is really the blink of an eye. And you can like some, you can dislike some. That's not really the point, but the dislocation, the creakiness, if you will. People don't change everything that quickly and adapt to it. So, and that we're definitely seeing some of that now. So that, this is a very short period of time, 20, 30, 40 years, some of these huge sea changes that we're starting to see. How are we doing on time, Ashley?
So we've got a couple of minutes that we need to kind of wrap this up, and maybe we just set it up, even though these are always standalone, but we're going to be continuing this topic on the backlash because I think that you said it well, kind of where we are now, like it's all women's fault. On what are some of the backlash pieces? And then how do we move forward and recognizing, because it, you said it, but I think it really needs underlined. There's a lot of men who embrace these changes and these opportunities, and for them to have a life that's fulfilling for them that might not have been in the stereotypical norm of this is a male role of what you're supposed to be. So, I think about how do we create conversation or movement that people just get to be, Scott? Like
A little
whatever that
flexibility.
is, right?
And men, quote unquote, police other men the same way women will, quote unquote, police other women about things like appearance,
Yeah.
and that is very powerful social stuff. Absolutely. So the next show, we're going to also talk about, so where are we today? Do a few comparative statistics. How many women do get married today before they're 30? What is the age of education? I think it's worth comparing some of those numbers a little bit and then actually talk about what that's changed and how we're seeing some backlash.
Well, and I would just like to say, P.S., it's not
Yes.
90%.
No, 90% of women today are not married before the age of 30. This is a true statement.
I know. Well, as always, great conversation.
Thank you, Ashley.
And I'm looking forward to finishing this topic. It's always interesting.
Take care.
All right, take care.